Hello guys and welcome back. We are now in the process of filling the gaps on our model. So as you can see, I've started already working away on this, and it is quite extensive in certain places, particularly down here and along where the cauldron meets all the more organic detail. But I'm going to look at it. Well, I've come to look at it in a different light. Initially, I was a bit disappointed and a bit frustrated with the way the parts were going together and the shrinkage that is inherent in this particular model. But I've realised now that this is a prime opportunity for a bit of training. Now, obviously, this is quite an expensive model to be learning with, but if you're not learning something while doing a model that's this extensive, then are you really enjoying it in any sort of manner? Like, are you enjoying that hobby building aspect of it? So I've decided that instead of woe betides me, I'm not sure what to do with this, I've decided to break out the sculpting tools and the green stuff and actually learn how to fill and how to sculpt a little bit with green stuff as far as gap filling goes. And I'm finding that I've actually found my mojo a bit with this model when it comes to this stage, because it's a part that I can get really into detail with and try and figure out how I can make the gap filling process blend into the rest of this beautifully sculpted model. There's no argument in my head or no doubt in my head that this isn't, is a beautifully made model. And trying to figure out a way that, a novice such as myself with green stuff and a sculpting tool can try and match at least well enough that when there's a layer of paint down, it's not completely obvious that you've been gap filling in certain places. So I have to say that's where I'm getting my enjoyment from it at the minute. So we're going to do a bit of that. So I have my green stuff, been dipping it in and out of water every time, been kneading it to make sure it stays nice and soft. If you've not used green stuff before, trust me, that's the easy part, is making sure that you have a cup of water nearby and you keep manipulating it every time you leave it for a few minutes just to keep it fluid and moving. Also try and keep it damp as well while you're working with it. So I have my sculpting tool. This is really the only end I've been using so far, which is kind of cool. I've also got some Sculptor's Vaseline here, which is essentially just Vaseline used just to lubricate the sculpting tool. That way the green stuff doesn't stick to it and doesn't pull away from the part of the model you're working on. So let's get a bit of my green stuff worked into a little bit of a sausage here. I'm kind of doing that off camera because I'm zoomed in a bit close now. So kind of just rolling it around to get it into roughly the shape I want. And I'm going to just set it roughly where I want it to begin. Now, here comes the fun part, because not only do I have to see what I'm doing on the camera, I have to be able to see what I'm doing on the model, which is kind of a challenge here. So let's just start roughly working it up into where I want it to be. And that Sculptor's Vaseline lets us do that really easily. It stops the green stuff sticking, and at the same time it lets it adhere to the resin of the model. And what I'm going to do here is, because that gap narrows quite drastically, I'm just going to remove that, consider that excess for now. And what I can do is start smoothing the green stuff into the gap. And sort of any other excess I'm kind of using to push into the gap a little bit. Now, I doubt that adds any strength to the model, but it certainly makes me feel better about it and wastes less green stuff that you could potentially leave just to dry on your bench. I'm using the edge of the sculpting tool now. You can see I'm starting to push it into that smaller gap, and then using the flat of the tool to smooth it out a little bit. Just put a bit more Vaseline onto the edge there. And now as I start to work the green stuff around and get into the contours, I can start to see where I need to start adding contours and start adding a little detail to try and blend it in a bit more. I'd be very hesitant to say that I'm actually sculpting anything at the minute. I'm sort of just trying to gap fill with style.
This is falling with style.
Just trying to blend. And I know it doesn't look like much at the minute, but after a few more minutes of tinkering and playing with it, we should start to see it conforming a bit more in an interesting and believable way. I'm sure, Claudia, if you're watching this from Raging Heroes, I'm sure you're going to be telling me I'm doing it wrong, or, you know, how dare you say you could match the sculpting skill of the design team. I know. Not trying to blow anyone's trumpet here. I'm just trying to see if I can learn, or if I can sharpen a skill that I've really neglected over the years. I think this miniature is the perfect opportunity to explore something that I've not really done very much before. Certainly not in this capacity. So we're still looking a little rough here. It's alright, we'll get there. I think if I add that line there and follow this sort of root formation down a little bit more, a little bit more excess that came away. I think that's starting to look a bit more organic, at least. Adding that extra contour there, I think, is helping. And I don't want to blend this sort of ridge in too much, because it looks kind of natural to me and I don't want to mess that up. That's more or less what I'm aiming for. I'm just trying to do that with as much of the gap filling as possible, just to make it look like something, you make it look purposeful, rather than just having said, well, you know, that gap is now filled and, you know, to hell with it, it's fine. So let's do a little bit more. And yes, I know that's way too much green stuff, but it's fine. I actually find this model is quite forgiving, and particularly in the organic areas, it's quite forgiving of putting too much on, because you can sort of make it look like there's a reason behind it being there. I'm going to say again, an organic reason, rather than, hey, there was a gap here and it's been filled, and it's quite obvious that that's a gap that was filled. So trying to use the shapes around the area where we've put the green stuff as much as possible helps blend it all together. And using this part of the sculpting tool with a bit more of that Vaseline to make it smooth. It doesn't have to be too smooth in this case. And you know what, if any of you guys at home, guys or girls at home, haven't used green stuff like this before, or haven't done any gap filling, really honestly give it a try, because it's not something that you can be taught so much. You can be taught the process, you can be taught what to look for, and like I'm sat here right now saying, you know, with this particular model, I'm trying to make the gap filling look organic and blend in, and it'll be different from other types of models. So it's really a process of just getting your eye to sort of figure out what the green stuff can be sculpted into to make it look like, you know, completely part of the model rather than just slapdash. We really don't want slapdash, because we want to make this model look impressive when it's finished. And once it has paint down on it, we don't want it to look like all this green stuff is actually a present. So I think that's coming on quite nicely on that gap. And if we move the model into the light a bit more, you can see a little more clearly what I've been trying to do further up on the model. Now, obviously we need to stick a layer of paint on this to see if what I've done has actually worked. We will find out. And particularly underneath the cauldron here, I can see that this is maybe going to be a little bit obvious later on. But I think around here, this one isn't too bad, and that one's quite tidy from what I can see. I think we'll do okay. I may be able to pull this off without it looking too obvious. But anyway, I think that's all for now. I will come back when the gaps are all filled on this, and yeah, we will see how it goes. Remember, guys, just don't be scared to try it, because if you see this going wrong, this green stuff, you will be able to work with it for about half an hour or so, and you can just rip it off and try again. So there is no fear to be had in trying this out. So guys, as you can see, I've now built pretty much the entirety of the model after filling the gaps on the main part of the carriage. I've gone ahead and built all the harpies that I need, and all the slaves that move this thing along. So, as I said before, I didn't want to build the harpies on camera because I understood that they were going to be a bit problematic, a bit fidgety, and yeah, they were. So for example, this one here, this set, is half a set that joins onto this half a set, which then goes on to this part of the bowl up here on the top, this big crucible thing. Down here, the sleeves are actually the easiest part because they're essentially two parts each. So usually there's a leg to stick on, and on some of these ones, or on most of these ones in this case anyway, the let's see if I can get in a bit closer here. The stick that they're using to help push the carriage along is also a separate piece. But they're not too bad compared to the harpies, which are quite difficult, and the instruction sheet doesn't really give you enough detail to feel very confident in putting them together. But you do figure out what the instructions are aiming at during that, so that's not too bad. This side as well, again, it was the first side I built, so I had the most trouble with that because it was just figuring out what wing goes where, because in our packaging a lot of the parts had come off their sprues, so I'd lost the numerical guide for that. So that's something that I had to work on and fidget with for quite a while. The ladies on the front here, again, they're not too bad either. The wrist and the sword join are a little bit fidgety. I already broke it and had to green stuff the sword back into position a couple of times. So on the carriage itself, there's quite a lot of green stuff work. It's very extensive in some cases, particularly on the top here. You can see on top of the crucible, there was a lot of large gaps there, so that took a lot of time. And while I was at that, I realized, or I decided, that the cape or the cloak that the woman's wearing didn't really look like it was sat properly on the fluid that's in the crucible, so I green stuffed a bit more of a further out lip just to make that cloth look like it's settling a bit more easily there. So apart from that, everything else was pretty straightforward. The two harpies that go onto the front of the crucible were pretty straightforward. A bit disappointed in some of the gaps that are on one of them, but I've been told that can't really be helped. And I completely understand. It's a very complex model. You're making it out of resin. You are going to have some issues that you're going to have to deal with. So what I would say is this is not something I'd recommend to someone that just looks at it and thinks, that's cool, I'm going to buy it, slap it together, and it's going to look great. It's not. It's going to have some problems that you're going to have to understand how to fix, particularly with the gaps on the main carriage. You need to understand how to work with green stuff. You need to be confident in working with green stuff. And what I ended up doing was learning a lot of how to work with green stuff on this miniature, which I guess in a roundabout way means it's not too bad a project to tinker with and play around with to get the final effect that you want from it. So in this stage, as it currently is, I would call this broken down into sub-assemblies. So I'll be painting it in these sub-assemblies, and then finally when that's all done, we'll glue it all together and that'll be the final product. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm going to push on. We're going to get into the studio and we're going to start priming it. I'm going to be using airbrush priming for this, so if you're interested in seeing how that works with zenithal highlighting and stuff like that, that's going to be a good place for you guys to maybe pick up one or two things on using an airbrush while priming. We'll also be using a lot of contrast paints on it too, and I'll explain that further when we get to the painting segment of how our zenithal highlighting will really make our contrast do so much work for us and really increase the, I hate to say the word contrast, funnily enough, it'll increase the level of the shading and highlighting that we're going to get from our initial priming stages, which will be very interesting to see. So I think until then, we're going to wrap our little build vlog up. We're going to take this into the painting studio and we're going to start slapping some paint on it. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Put your comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So thanks very much and see you again soon.